Welcome to a special edition of How to Play. I'm the pleasantly ruthless Becca Scott, and today's game is the epic landmark strategy classic, Axis and Allies! To celebrate the re-release of the 50th anniversary edition, we're playing an 8-hour marathon live on October 11th, 2017. If you're watching this from the future, what is it like there? Inspired by the popular Panzer Blitz, Axis and Allies was one of the first complex strategy games. The anniversary printing does a pretty good job of outlining each player's setup, objectives, and technologies, but we're gonna show it to you in a video, which is way cooler! If you've played an older version, don't freak out, there's some changes in this one. For example, it includes Italy and China. We're gonna quickly go through the components of the game to start out. Here's the main board. It represents a global map from the middle years of World War II. Each player is going to represent a different world power on one of the two teams, the UK, the USSR, and the USA. And the evil Axis powers, Germany, Japan, and Italy. Boo! Each power's starting territories are marked on the game board with national control symbols. Like that. It's real easy when you start because there's a national control symbol on the board printed right there that tells you where to put them to set up. There are a few neutral territories on the board, such as Turkey and Mongolia. They're dead zones in terms of gameplay. No one can even fly over Mongolia. Don't try it. The 18 crucial victory cities are controlled by various powers at the setup, but over the course of the game, these territories will switch hands. The first team to control the requisite number of victory tokens at the end of a game round wins the war. Each player starts with a helpful setup chart displaying the beginning unit placements, initial funds, and national objectives unique to each country. I'm real glad they made that. It's nice to have a cheat sheet. The in-game currency is represented by Industrial Production Certificates, or IPCs, and the turn-based income for each player is tracked on the national production chart. Alternatively, if you don't trust the other players to not change the score when you're in the bathroom, you can also keep track on pen and paper. On that same board, the Research and Development chart tracks the innovations each player can discover in-game. Once all the units have been placed, the turn order can begin based on which year you decide to start in. You could do the 1941 setup or the 1942 setup. Yeah, that's pretty cool. The turn sequence begins with Research and Development, then Purchase Units. You can do that combat move, Conduct Combat, a non-combat move, Mobilize New Units, and Collect Income. Okay, I know this list sounds super scary. Don't worry, I'm gonna hold your hand and walk you through it. So first up is the Research and Development phase. Players can buy researchers and trap them in a cage to make them do cool inventions for you. Your researchers only come up with cool stuff if they roll a 6. If no 6s are rolled, research fails. Your scientists have failed you and insulted your nation's intelligence. But the good thing is the player gets to keep those tokens. If at least one 6 is rolled, success! All researcher tokens are discarded, and the player rolls the breakthrough die to reveal which research they will learn. Any breakthroughs learned can be marked with a national control marker on the research board. Technological breakthroughs can increase units' mobility, effectiveness in combat, or even lower production costs. Next up, the Purchase Units phase. IPCs can be traded in for units based on their cost, which is listed in the mobilization zone. Once purchased, the units are then set aside in that zone to be deployed later in the turn. The fun begins in the next phase, the combat move, where you strategically move your pieces in order to destroy the other team. Or, just play the game, be cool about it. Players may move as many units into as many hostile territories as they wish based on their movement points. If you ever go into a hostile territory, your movement must stop even if you have movement points left. Any movement into an enemy-controlled territory counts as combat movement, even if there aren't any enemies currently inside that area. all combat movement happens simultaneously, and special rules exist for submarines, amphibious assaults, and aircraft, but we got bigger fish to fry. You'll find that info in the rulebook. Let's get to that conduct combat phase already and start that killing. The fighting sequence starts after all the combat moves for the active player have been completed. Then we begin with strategic bombing raids, amphibious assaults, and general combat. Strategic bombing raids utilize bombers to make an economic attack on an enemy's industrial complex. If the defending player has any anti-aircraft in the territory, that gun may roll 1 die for each attacking aircraft. Each roll result of 1 destroys an aircraft. Next up, amphibious assaults. In Axis and Allies, sea vessels cannot capture territory, they gotta stay in the sea. So having a mobile land force can be crucial to winning the game. Amphibious assaults have their own sequence as well. First off, you gotta do sea combat. This begins if the defending player has any warships in the sea zone, and it's resolved with the normal combat rules. We'll get to that. If no defending warships are present, the attacking battleships and cruisers can bombard that coastal territory. They're gonna roll their attack dice. These ships can turn defending land units into casualties on the battle board. Lastly, if the sea zone has been cleared and no warships remain, the attacking transports offload their units for land combat. Which leads us to glorious, glorious battle rules. Here's the sequence. Place the units on the battle board, splitting them on the respective attacker and defender sides. The columns represent the attack values for each unit based on their side, and only that current player and the defending player can participate. Your buddies gotta wait for their turn. Attacking units fire by rolling 1 die for each attacking unit with an attack value, listed here. Rolling all units in the column at the same time, each number rolled on or below the attack number scores a hit. And now the attacking units fire! Bam, bam! Ah! Like that. For each scored hit, the defending player chooses 1 unit to remove to the casualty zone. But don't worry, you sad defender. That unit will get to return fire before it dies for good. Then using the same method, the defending units fire. For each defender's scored hit, the attacker chooses a unit to remove from the battle board and place back into the storage tray. Oh, so sad. If the defender had scored any hits, the attacker would choose which units to remove from the battle board and place back into the storage tray. Afterwards, the defender's casualties depart the battlefield as well. Once all those corpses are cleared, the attacking player may choose to press the attack, repeating the combat process, or retreat if you're chill. Combat ends once one side loses all units, or if that attacking player chooses to retreat and moves all their forces into just one neighboring friendly territory from whence they came. Combat's resolved when only one side remains on the contested field. The attackers, if they're successful, are going to take control of that territory, and they're gonna place their marker inside. Remember to adjust the national production chart based on the zone's value. If the defending player wins the combat, or if both sides totally murder each other totally dead, the territory remains in the control of the defender. After the combat phase, players may participate in the non-combat move. In this phase, players move any units that did not move during the combat move phase or participate in combat during the turn, and they'll go nice and friendly to other nice territories. The MODilize New Units phase allows all those previously purchased units on the mobilization zone to be placed onto the map. Some restrictions include units can only be placed in a territory with an industrial complex controlled by the player since the start of the turn. So if you took something over this turn, you don't get to use it till next turn. Players can place an amount of units at a complex equal to the IPC income value of that territory. Remember, damage tokens from an air raid lessens the amount of deployable units. Finally, it's time to collect income. Way, make it rain! I made a mess. Based on the territories a player controls, their national production level indicates the number of IPCs a player collects in this phase. Any national objectives fulfilled by this point award a bonus set of IPCs as well. 2 caveats. If a player's capital city is owned by an opponent, the player cannot collect income of any kind. You gotta get that city back, man! You can't let them have that city! Additionally, allies cannot lend IPCs between powers. Each nation is on their own. Quit asking to borrow money from your friends. It's not cool. And that's the core rules of Axis and Allies. You made it. After a full round of play, if either side has the requisite number of cities under their control, the game's over, and that team wins. We skip some of the intricacies of sea combat, transporting units, and individual unit specialties because we want to start playing some freaking Axis and Allies! So get your board, bust it open, and play some games, y'all. Check out Game the Game, where we play this and other games on twitch.tv/Geek and Sundry or on Alpha.